Alright, picture this. A teenager with her whole life ahead of her, hanging out with friends, posting on social media, living what seemed like a perfectly normal life, but beneath that picture-perfect exterior, a dark, tragic story that would leave 2 people dead and an entire community shaken. This is the case of McKenzie Shirilla, a 19-year-old who went from being a carefree teen to facing life in prison. Her crime? Plowing her car into a building at 100 miles per hour, killing her boyfriend Dominic Russo and his friend Davon Flanigan. But here's the part that will send chills down your spine. While grieving families mourned their losses, Mackenzie seemed to be living it up. Going to concerts, posting TikToks, even reaching out to modeling agencies. It's a story so wild, you'd think it was ripped straight out of a Netflix docuseries. So, how does someone go from a murder scene to a concert crowd? Let's dive in. This one's a roller coaster. It all starts in the early hours of July 31st, 2022. McKenzie Shirilla, Dominic Russo and Davon Flanigan were driving in Mackenzie's Toyota Camry after what seemed like a typical night out. The trio had been hanging out, nothing out of the ordinary, until Mackenzie decided to take a route home that would change everything. Security footage later revealed what happened next. As Mackenzie approached a business park in Strongsville, Ohio, she floored the gas pedal. The car accelerated to a shocking 100 miles per hour on a narrow, winding street. There wasn't a single attempt to brake. No signs of swerving to avoid the inevitable. She drove straight into a brick wall. The crash was catastrophic. When first responders arrived, they found Dominic and Davon dead at the scene. Mackenzie survived, but with serious injuries. From the outside, it looked like a tragic accident. A teenage driver losing control. Sadly, it's not unheard of. But as investigators dug deeper, the story took a much darker turn. The question no one could ignore: was this really an accident? Or was it something much worse? The relationship. But let us rewind a bit, because to understand what happened that night, you have to rewind to the relationship between McKenzie Shirilla and Dominic Russo. They weren't just friends or casual acquaintances, they were high school sweethearts. The kind of relationship that starts with giggles in hallways and sneaky texts in class. But like many young relationships, it wasn't all sunshine and sweet Instagram posts. Friends and family described their bond as intense, passionate, but also turbulent. They'd been together for about 3 years by the time of the crash, and those years were marked by constant ups and downs. Arguments seemed to follow them like a shadow, with some friends even saying their fights could get heated. Mackenzie, by all accounts, had a strong personality. She was known for being headstrong and, at times, controlling. Dominic, on the other hand, was described as more easygoing, someone who just wanted to have fun and avoid drama. And that dynamic created friction. While they clearly cared about each other, people close to them couldn't help but notice how often their arguments escalated. One friend claimed Dominic had expressed frustration with Mackenzie just weeks before the crash, even mentioning that he was considering ending things. But breaking up wasn't as simple as it sounded. The couple shared a tight-knit social circle, and their lives were deeply intertwined. It wasn't just Dominic and Mackenzie. It was Dominic and Mackenzie and everyone they knew. Walking away wasn't easy, especially for 2 teenagers navigating emotions that felt larger than life. But the biggest red flag: the power dynamics. Friends of the couple often said Mackenzie had a way of getting what she wanted, whether that meant controlling situations or steering arguments in her favor. There was even talk that Dominic sometimes felt trapped, unsure how to navigate her moods or her intensity. And then there was the jealousy. Mackenzie reportedly struggled with the idea of Dominic hanging out with other people, especially other girls. She was protective, some would say possessive, and that added fuel to an already combustible relationship. This wasn't just a couple hitting a rough patch, it was a relationship teetering on the edge. And while every relationship has its struggles, Theirs seemed to carry an undercurrent of volatility that made people worry. In hindsight, many close to the couple have said there were warning signs. Small moments that, at the time, didn't seem like much, but now feel impossible to ignore. So, as investigators pieced together the events leading up to the crash, they couldn't overlook this dynamic. What role, if any, did the turbulence of Mackenzie and Dominic's relationship play in what happened? Was the crash a split-second loss of control? Or was it a tragic culmination of years of tension and unresolved emotions? The case. After the crash, the initial assumption was that it was a tragic accident. 2 young lives lost, 1 severely injured. It seemed like a devastating misstep, the kind of thing that leaves a community reeling. But as investigators dug deeper, cracks began to form in that narrative. This wasn't just a case of reckless driving or teenage carelessness. Something darker was lurking beneath the surface. The first red flag: the car's black box data. Modern vehicles are like silent witnesses, recording everything happening inside them. In Mackenzie's car, the black box revealed chilling details. Moments before the crash, the accelerator was pushed to the floor, maxing out the speed. Not only that, but there was no sign of braking, none at all. It was as though Mackenzie was driving full throttle towards disaster, with no intention of stopping. Then came the surveillance footage. Cameras from nearby businesses caught the final moments of the car's journey. The video showed Mackenzie's Toyota speeding down the road, weaving through traffic. And then, suddenly, it veered straight into the brick wall. The footage was grainy, but the evidence was damning. Investigators had to ask, why would someone accelerate towards a wall with that much force? As they tried to answer that question, they turned to Mackenzie herself. She survived the crash with serious injuries, but her story raised more questions than answers. She told investigators she couldn't remember what happened, blaming her memory loss on the traumatic impact. At first, it sounded plausible, yet injuries often cause memory gaps. But the more the police dug into her past, the more suspicions grew. Witnesses began coming forward, painting a picture of a relationship that wasn't as picture-perfect as it seemed. Friends of Dominic Russo revealed stories about arguments, jealousy, and Mackenzie's controlling tendencies. One friend told investigators that Mackenzie had made troubling comments in the past, joking about crashing the car or teaching Dominic a lesson during fights. At the time, they'd laughed it off. Now, those offhand remarks took a haunting new meaning. And then there were the text messages. Investigators combed through Mackenzie's phone and found heated conversations with Dominic in the days leading up to the crash. These texts hinted at unresolved tension, arguments that never seemed to find closure. There was a sense of finality in some of Mackenzie's words, almost like she was preparing for a breaking point. As the pieces of the puzzle came together, one thing became clear. This wasn't just an accident. The combination of black box data, surveillance footage, witness testimonies, and Mackenzie's own history began to point to something far more intentional. The crash that took Dominic Russo's life, and that of his friend Davon Flanigan, was no longer just a tragedy. It was starting to look like a crime. And the more investigators uncovered, the harder it became to deny that McKenzie Shirilla might have been the one behind it all. The evidence. As the investigation continued, the evidence against Mackenzie Shirilla piled up like bricks in a wall, each piece making it harder to imagine this crash as anything other than deliberate. Investigators weren't just trying to explain what happened, they were piecing together why it happened. And the deeper they dug, the darker the story became. The forensic team examined the car itself, a vehicle that now felt like both a weapon and a grave. They ruled out mechanical failure almost instantly. There was no issue with the brakes, no malfunction in the steering, nothing that could have caused Mackenzie to lose control. This car wasn't broken. It had been driven with intent. But intent can be tricky to prove, so investigators kept looking. They turned their attention to Mackenzie's actions that day, trying to reconstruct her mindset in the hours and minutes leading up to the crash. What they found painted a troubling picture. Mackenzie and Dominic had been in an on-again, off-again relationship, one that friends described as toxic and volatile. According to witnesses, Mackenzie often struggled with jealousy and control issues, especially when it came to Dominic's relationships and social life. The couple had a history of explosive fights, the kind that burned hot and left scars. Friends and family began to suggest that Mackenzie's love for Dominic wasn't just passionate, it was possessive. More damning than the testimonies, though, were the digital breadcrumbs Mackenzie had left behind. Investigators found internet searches on her phone that sent chills down their spines. Phrases like, "ways to survive a car crash," and "what happens when someone dies instantly," stood out. Impossible to ignore. They weren't just random curiosities. They were haunting clues that pointed to premeditation. Then, there were the videos. As investigators combed through Mackenzie's social media, they uncovered videos she had posted in the weeks leading up to the crash. In one clip, Mackenzie jokingly referred to herself as a crazy girlfriend, laughing as she talked about how far she'd go to keep Dominic in her life. To her followers, it was just another over-the-top TikTok trend. In hindsight, it felt like a warning sign no one noticed. Friends of Davon Flanigan, the third person in the car that night, also spoke up. They described him as an innocent bystander, caught in the middle of Mackenzie and Dominic's chaos. On the night of the crash, he'd simply been there for a ride, not realizing the emotional storm brewing between the couple. His death was a tragic collateral consequence of whatever was happening in Mackenzie's mind. With all these pieces in hand, prosecutors began building their case. They argued that Mackenzie wasn't just reckless, she was vengeful. That night, they said, Mackenzie had made a decision. If she couldn't control Dominic, she'd ensure no one else could have him either. It was a chilling thought, but one that seemed to explain the evidence far better than any other theory. The verdict. A moment of reckoning. The moment of truth arrived. After weeks of testimony, deliberation, and mounting tension, Mackenzie's fate was in the hands of Judge Nancy Margaret Russo. Judge Russo, who had earned a reputation for being a no-nonsense judge, was ready to hand down her decision. The courtroom fell into a charged silence as the judge read her verdict. The scale of the crimes were clear. Mackenzie wasn't just a girl who made a reckless mistake. No, she was the person who took a life, 2 lives. And in the eyes of the court, it was intentional. Guilty, the judge said, as she delivered her verdict on both counts of murder. The word hung in the air, a weight that could not be easily lifted. Mackenzie was responsible for the deaths of both Dominic Russo and Davon Flanigan. She had intentionally driven her car at high speed into a building, ending their lives and her own future in one disastrous act. Judge Russo, known for her firm stance on justice, wasn't about to sugarcoat the consequences. She called Mackenzie's actions hell on wheels, a chilling but apt description of the destruction Mackenzie had wrought. "You're not just a girl who made a bad decision," Judge Russo said, locking eyes with the young woman who had caused so much pain. "You took 2 lives. You are solely responsible for this tragedy, and you have forever altered the lives of those left behind." Mackenzie, sitting there in the courtroom, could do little but stare ahead, her eyes betraying the smallest flicker of regret. But it was clear that her regret wasn't about the lives lost. It was about the future she was about to lose. She was still clinging to the hope that somehow she could avoid facing the full brunt of her actions. But it wasn't going to happen. Families of the victims had already poured their hearts into the courtroom. Davon's mother, for example, spoke with a quiet devastation, remembering her son's dreams of opening a barbershop, his kind nature, and his heart of gold. Her words weren't just a tribute to her son, they were a desperate plea for justice. "My son, Davon, is more than just a name. He was a protector, a best friend, and a brother. The pain I feel isn't just about the loss of him, it's about the void he's left in our family. We didn't just lose him, we lost a piece of who we are. Surveillance footage from the scene showed Mackenzie's car speeding down the road, pushing 100 miles per hour straight into a building with nothing but destruction in her wake. That wasn't the sign of someone who had lost control. That was the sign of someone who was making a choice. It was later revealed that Mackenzie had been sending emails to a modeling agency while recovering in the hospital. She was posting photos of herself at concerts, even after the crash, showing off her "I'm doing just fine" attitude to the world, seemingly without a care for the families she had just devastated. She was more concerned with the next steps in her modeling career than she was with the fact that her boyfriend, Dominic, and his friend, Davon, were both dead. For Mackenzie, it wasn't about the lives she had ruined. It was about what she was going to do next. And it's not just the actions that are disturbing, it's the mindset behind them. In the hours following the crash, Mackenzie's mother called Christine Russo, Dominic's mother, and instead of expressing remorse or sympathy, the first thing Mackenzie's mum said was, "Don't believe what you're reading on social media." Social media? How is that the priority when two young men have just lost their lives? It was almost as if Mackenzie's family was more worried about their image than the lives destroyed by Mackenzie's reckless decision. Then, there's Mackenzie's own words. As she faced the court, she expressed sorrow, deep, heartfelt sorrow, for herself. Her statement was a mix of regret and pleading, hoping to somehow salvage her future. "I love Dee and Davon," she said, her voice wavering. "I wish I could take all your pain away." But the thing is, no amount of tears or pleading could bring back the lives she had stolen. She wanted to be the victim in her own tragedy. But the reality is, Mackenzie was the cause of it. Why did she do it? Why did she choose to end two lives and destroy her own in the process? Some may say it was out of a desperation for attention. Maybe it was the pressures of her world. A world where image and status are everything. Maybe it was because, for Mackenzie, a modeling career or a concert was more important than the people she was supposed to care about. We'll never really know for sure. What we do know is that whatever the motive, it wasn't enough to justify the catastrophic consequences that followed.